Welcome to the Economic Rockstar Podcast with your host, Frank Conway, connecting brilliant minds in economics and finance.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Economic Rockstar Podcast. And in this week's episode, I'm joined with Naomi Brockwell, who has previously featured in the podcast back in December 2014. And in both episodes, we talked about Bitcoin. So it's great to catch up because at the time when the episode was first released 4 years ago, Bitcoin was trading at about $200. And given our recent conversation, which was recorded in October, Bitcoin had been trading at about $6,500. And as of today, the 16th of November 2018, Bitcoin is now trading at about $5,500 and experiencing quite a bit of volatility, but something that the stock market is undergoing at the moment. If you're unfamiliar with that first podcast episode with Naomi, well, she is an advocate of Bitcoin, a very avid supporter, and promotes it in her social media platforms such as YouTube, as well as on her podcast, which is called Bitcoin, Blockchain, and the Technologies of Our Future. Compared to previous episodes, this is a shorter episode, so you're talking about 30 minutes. But again, if you want to hear more about this, why not check out the previous episode in which Naomi was featured in, which was episode number 9, in which we discussed Bitcoin's liberty, government, and fiat currency. So we just do a catch up and we talk about what has evolved since that conversation, such as initial coin offerings or ICOs, and the introduction of newer crypto coins such as Ethereum, Zcash, and Monero, as well as Naomi's beliefs about Bitcoin and blockchain. So if you want to check out the links mentioned by Naomi, why not visit economicrockstar.com/Naomi. That's Naomi. And as always, you can download and keep this audio on your phone for another day if you don't want to stream it online. You can do that from my website. And I'd like to give a big shout out to Dave Adsid, who is a recent Patreon supporter of the podcast. So thanks very much, Dave. And I hope you enjoyed this episode with Naomi. And if you want to continue on supporting this podcast just like Dave, why not check out patreon.com/economic rockstar, in which you can actually access or choose from one of the tiers from as little as $1 a month. And that will go a long way to help run this podcast. And if you want to support the podcast in any way, why not share your favourite episode with others, or even subscribe to the podcast on your favourite podcast player so you'll always get a notification and never miss a future episode. But what you could also do is visit economicrockstar.com and join the Economic Rockstar community. So enjoy this episode with Naomi Brockwell, also known as Bitcoin Girl. Hi Naomi, how are you keeping? Welcome back to the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me back. It's been a long time. The last episode was 2014.
December 4th, 2014.
That's so long ago. It's ridiculous. I feel like the world has completely changed and also hasn't changed at all. So a lot to talk about since then. So have you gotten into Bitcoin since then?
I have. Do you know, I was interested
I'm
in
impressed
it.
Then. I'm glad that you have.
It was very difficult to buy it at the time. There wasn't as many exchanges, and leading into it, I think I need to go to New York and check out these kind of pop-up exchanges that were happening at the time. And I said, no, I leave it. Bitcoin needs a little bit more history before I can do some further fundamental technical analysis. I was thinking this type of thing. Instead of, as you may all know with the documentaries, it was, no, you need your dollars, keep your hard cash, don't be buying a crypto, it's just virtual, we don't understand it. And I was quite reserved in our conversation back in 2014. It was on the tip of my tongue. I wanted to talk to you about how can I trade Bitcoin? And we never got to that at all. I never asked it.
That's funny.
I know. And how have you been keeping?
Busy. Crypto keeps me things are pretty intense. I'm doing lots of emceeing these days, so lots of traveling around doing blockchain events. And I actually just went, so I've been a producer for Stossel, and I just, the start of this year, decided to focus on my own channel, which is a blockchain crypto channel. So that's been super fun. And it sort of plays into like being able to travel around for conferences. It's actually really helped the show a lot because I get to meet so many awesome people. It's I feel very lucky.
Because I do keep in touch with, what you're doing, and I see you're doing a lot of emceeing, as you mentioned, and you do quite a bit of traveling. And then I discovered you on your podcast. I think it might have been back in February, March when I first came across you. A little bit too late. You had started a few months before, but you're really putting out a lot of episodes since July. And that podcast, I'll send a link on it. But as you mentioned, Bitcoin and blockchain and technologies. So that seems to be going great because you're mixing with a lot of people who are in that particular space. And you're obviously sharing and accumulating knowledge and sharing that with those people who are listening to your podcast. Yeah,
I like sort of being in that role. I coming from a communications background and then just being absolute avid fan of Austrian economics and cryptocurrency. I try to be someone who can bridge that gap between anyone who doesn't really understand this world and like they're a little bit curious but also provide content for people who have been involved. So my audience is a bit mixed, but I try to put out a new video every day. I actually have a fun thing that I put out yesterday. So some friends and I went to Central Park and we set up a picnic. And we asked passers-by, first of all, like, do you know anything about Bitcoin? Do you know anything about blockchain? And they're all like, no, don't know anything. I prefer my credit card, thank you. And I was like, all right, typical responses. But then we asked this one girl, and she happened to be Australian. Maybe it's the Australian in her that made her feel comfortable talking with me. I don't know. But then we were like, listen, we're about to set up this picnic and give a demonstration of how blockchains actually work. Using like transacting food and writing ledgers, like, well, we'll give you a physical demonstration. Are you interested? She's like, sure. So we have this, I just put out this video yesterday where we all sat down and we explained to her how blockchain works in the middle of Central Park. And it was really super fun. So
I can imagine that piece of cake being broken up into so many different pieces and then spread around to everybody and then trying to bring it back together again as one piece.
Why is this cake so expensive? $6,400? You don't have to buy a whole cake.
but like even when we spoke there weren't many coins at all.
No,
and it was just mostly Bitcoin. Yeah.
Well, no one really talked about the other coins either. No. There was Bitcoin. I mean, Litecoin was already around. There were a bunch of coins, but no one's really paying attention. Mm. And so it was a fascinating world. Like I think Jason King, who runs Academy, has this great quote where he says, back then we didn't used to call it blockchain. We used to call it Bitcoin because that's all there was. Mm. And so it's a strange world where now you just have all of these ICOs and all of these coins, and so much of the landscape has changed. Basically blockchain is a technology that decentralizes trust. So that's not only applicable to currency, that's also applicable to corporations. It's applicable to all kinds of other organizational structures that require trust and that currently operate with centralized trust. If we can learn to decentralize that, there are so many different things we can do. You already see different coins and platforms experimenting with different smart contracts. You have decentralized exchanges now, which we didn't have back then. It's a really exciting landscape just to see all of these things evolve. Yeah. And then you have like crazy people out there who are like, there's no value to this whatsoever. It's like, we've literally figured out how to make digital assets irreproducible. We've literally figured out how to decentralize trust. This is huge. Like, it's like they don't realize how many applications this can have and how this could fundamentally change so much of the makeup of society. So I'm always constantly curious and optimistic about all the things going on. I find this space super exciting. So very, very happy to be involved with it.
Do you prefer, is it best to stick with those optimists, or is your role, or would you prefer a mission whereby you want to educate those people who have doubt or are pessimists about it? Because if you're pessimistic from the outset, you're never really, it's going to be very difficult to change a person's mindset.
I mean, it's always hard to change anyone's mind about anything, right? Mm. And it really depends on their fundamental personality. I think some people are very They're very much used to having opinions and keeping their opinions for their whole life. They don't really want to hear other opinions. They don't really want to learn. Then there are people who just have never been exposed to it. That's sort of the market that I target. You know, they haven't, no one's really sat down and taken the time to explain things to them. And maybe they haven't found it that interesting, but I bet that there is something about this tech that I could get them interested in. You know, it's just a matter of understanding your audience and knowing, okay, so what do they relate to? Not everyone relates to Austrian economics. Not everyone relates to the tech side of things. So what do they want from life? What do they want to see? What problems do they see that they want to try and solve? So once you can tap into that, they may not have been interested before, but you can definitely get them interested. So I think that's the key to growing awareness of this tech. It's not fighting with the trolls on Twitter that we see who are just like writing these angry comments to you like, oh, you terrible Bitcoiner, die. You know, it's like, there's so much of that.
But even within the Bitcoin community, there's like, you shouldn't buy Bitcoin. It should be Bitcoin Cash. That's the real Bitcoin, the true Bitcoin, because it's the purest. The Bitcoin actually forked, and you know, within that you have those arguments, and then what's a worry as well is that other people are setting up these fake accounts. Like I follow Charlie Lee from Litecoin, and he and even Vitalik from Ethereum, they've put out warnings that look at there are Twitter accounts out there that are imitating. They just copy the image. It's a slightly different Twitter handle, and people are trying to get you to give them their Bitcoin, and so they could return you something else instead. So there's always that fraudulence, which happens with cash. Yeah. You know, this isn't helping the actual community, but I think over time we'll all overcome that as well. We'll be able to spot it.
You really believe that, though? I mean, you look at all the different ways that society has managed to fight with each other, and it's just never gone away. Like, I just think that people inherently like picking their teams, and it's this irrational fear of, you know, your team not having predominance, or people not respecting your team, or people undermining your team, and everyone just kind of sticks up for their team. And it's just this terribly closed-minded approach. You know, there's so much evolving in this space at all times. Things are constantly changing. If someone 4 years ago, like when we first spoke, Frank, if like people at that point have said, okay, I'm going to close my mind to everything that blockchain can offer because I already know it all. And then since then, they're just like, well, I've made up my mind and this is the thing I believe in and I don't want anything else. I mean, they're crazy. There's so much development that's happened there. So much new tech that's evolved. So anyone who's like, sticking to their guns and sticking to those ideas because that's the idea that they decided on and they made up their mind and they think they understand it. Like, you need to be constantly keeping up to date with this. You know, you see it within the crypto community. It's kind of annoying, but you also see it outside of the crypto community. You see these haters who are like, I believed that Bitcoin was a tulip bubble back then. And, you know, and it's still a tulip bubble. It's like, back then you were calling it a bubble at $50, mate. Like, that wasn't the best prediction. Maybe you're right. You know, maybe this will disappear. No one really knows. But also, isn't it incredibly narrow-minded and like this parochial view of the world that you decide before this tech has even flourished in its early, like, nascent stages of just raw tech that has been largely unexplored? You really made up your mind back then? I'd do a little more research before you do that.
Yeah. The most important thing out of this, I think, is blockchain. You know, whatever about, like, we don't know whether Bitcoin as the cryptocurrency will be the one that'll thrive. It could be one of the others that are in existence now or something else in the future. Who knows? But what we were left with is a fantastic technology and offering even more decentralized management of data and also the security that comes with it.
For sure. I mean, people have varying responses to that as well. You ask them, what's the killer app for blockchain tech? And overwhelmingly, I've heard people say, well, currency. Bitcoin is the killer app. You know, it's great. We don't know if Bitcoin's going to survive. I'm really bullish on Bitcoin. I personally think that it's great, but we don't know if it's going to survive, and maybe another cryptocurrency could take over. You know, a lot of things could happen. So I still believe that currency is just such an important application of blockchain, whether it's in the form of Bitcoin or something else, or Bitcoin as we know it today is, I mean, that's constantly evolving as well. So, you know, it'll evolve into a different form. as new tech develops. And I mean, they just released their first sidechain. Blockstream released it called Liquid. So already things are evolving and we're being able to apply different things. But then you have someone like Scott Stornetta. So people cite him as being the creator of the early form of the blockchain when he was working at Bell Labs, Xerox PARC. And just an incredibly brilliant man. Had a great time chatting with him, but I asked him, so what's the killer app? And he had a different response. He's like, listen, this is a tool for decentralizing trust. So we're going to see corporations 2.0, he called them. He said, we're going to have this ability to decentralize these power structures, decentralize data, as you just mentioned, and decentralize those kind of power brokers and middlemen that we've seen in so many institutions. We're eventually not going to need those. We're going to have smart contracts that can replace a lot of what corporate structure is today. So that's a fascinating idea, this idea that we're going to have this ecosystem of all of these competing blockchains and currencies and applications, and none of us know what's going to happen, but it's definitely a fascinating prospect.
Even some of the universities, for example, MIT's Media Lab, they've created, based on the open source code that's available, they've created a way in using blockchain so that they can decentralize all the information that students have regarding their results, individual results, that if the students were to get a transcript or if they were to get their papers or certificates or degrees, that's all made available online and reducing costs significantly. So, that is available, whether it's going to be rolled out, and people are finding it very difficult to pick up on them initially. Who knows? So I was just reading up on it lately, and we can see significant costs being reduced as well based on that personal information. Now, the problem could be that you lose your private key and you cannot access this type of information. But do you see this branching out more into so the educational sector, or, as you mentioned, there's smart contracts? They can be put into place for when there's a relationship between two parties and not having the middleman made available.
I mean, it's definitely as I said before, it's hard to know what the applications of this are. What are we seeing at the moment? Well, we're seeing very early forms of smart contracts being developed. We're seeing, different decentralized exchanges being set up. The idea that you can decentralized trust is kind of a profound idea. Before, if you wanted to exchange something with someone else, you had to really trust them, or you had to trust a third-party institution. You had to say, okay, I will trust you to be the arbiter of this, that you will keep my funds, you will keep their funds, you will exchange them, give it over to both of us. So we've had to trust big corporations and institutions for a long time. And perhaps we're getting to a world now where we don't have to do that so much, because you have these smart contracts that basically operate where you put in this deposit, it holds in this escrow, and then if you don't get the good or the money that you're promised, then your deposit is released back to you. So these smart contracts that the ability to have digital assets that are irreproducible, that are unique, has really opened the doors for all of these different unique applications. So I think that we're just seeing the beginning of these type of things. I remember 2014, I went to my first blockchain wedding. And at that stage, we were thinking that's going to be great. We can put weddings on the blockchain so you don't need to go to a registry and all of that. I mean, there are different hiccups that we're facing along the way, and we're learning, and the ecosystem's evolving, because governments at the moment are not recognizing blockchains as being this legitimate source of information. In fact, one of the few countries that is actually recognizing digital evidence stored in blockchains is China. They about a month ago, they said that now they will accept digital evidence that's been timestamped in a blockchain in trials. So that's a fascinating move forward. And I think that we are going to see more and more of that. But obviously, governments are hesitant to give up their power. They're hesitant to say, okay, well, we'll trust this other thing that we can't control. At the moment, they're in the center of all the trust systems. You're relying on the government to be the arbiter in case something goes wrong. You're relying on the government to execute different contracts and things. So I think that as their power goes down, they're probably going to fight harder as well. And that's something that we've definitely seen recently you've seen different legislation in different states. Like I think since our last chat, the bit license has been implemented. I think that was 2000, could have been 2014, could have been 2015, but now we've really seen the effects of that. In the last 4 years, we've had eight companies in New York being issued a bit license. I mean, there were hundreds of people here in the blockchain space operating, and so many of them left when the bit license was introduced. Kraken left immediately, Shapeshift left immediately. New Yorkers were left with no access to any of these services, and eight bit licenses out of all these companies. Like, that's just such a bottleneck of innovation, and you've just seen the innovation go elsewhere. So you've seen places like Malta pick up the slack. You've seen places like Wyoming saying, well, we're going to be a great place if you want to register here for your crypto business. And so we're starting to, I think maybe the government is starting to realize the consequences of really reining in this tech and what happens there. But I do think that we've got a big battle ahead of us, because they don't relinquish power too easily. And I think blockchain is a threat to centralized power in all forms, whether it's governments or corporate power, or power from the Federal Reserve or any of that. Like
yesterday, Coinbase announced that they're going to have their European head office in Dublin here in Ireland.
I know, that's pretty exciting, because I mean, the idea that with Brexit happening and they're looking for like a plan B, right? And so having that as in crypto-friendly Ireland is pretty interesting. Would you say that Dublin is a good place for crypto at the moment?
I don't know. I don't get a sense of a lot of activity compared to obviously from, San Francisco and other places.
Yeah.
But there have been conferences and organized over the summer. I think there was the first ATM was put into one of the pubs in Dublin. It could have been about 4 years ago. So that was already in there, installed. But other than that, there's not much of discussion going on in the media, in the public domain. People are interested. They definitely were interested last year. That's all people could gravitate toward when they see rising prices.
I know, the price goes up, and you get in a taxi and your taxi driver is giving you hot tips about like which coins to invest in. And it's like, ooh.
Everyone wants to buy when it's high, but they just don't want to touch it at $5,000 or $6,000. They just don't want to touch it. And it's like, obviously we're at a point where it's plateauing and you don't know which direction it's going to go. You look at a bit of stability at the moment. I don't like to predict where things are going to go anyway.
But isn't it also fascinating that everyone's talking about this horrific bear market? When you actually look at the graphs from a year ago, like we're back to where we were a year ago, Yeah. So that's pretty funny that this is devastating for people. You should have seen when it went like $38 and crashed back down like near zero, or like when it gets to 1,050 and then ends up plateauing at 200 and lasts there for like a couple of years. So it's really fascinating for me, people who got in right at the peak in 2017. Like you saw all through 17, it just ramped up, and we got all the way up to 20,000, and then obviously the market's correcting, and market mechanism is working. It's trying to find the price, and all of these people who got in right at the peak, they're like throwing their hat in now. They're saying, oh, this is terrible. I've lost all this stuff. And everyone else who's been in crypto for a while saying, oh, we've been here before.
And that's what your hat says at the back there behind your left shoulder, HODL.
It absolutely does. I've got a hat here. You can't see it because you are.
I prefer that
audio,
hat other than MAGA.
Absolutely. This is a great hat. So, I got some things here to remind me what Bitcoin's about. I mean, I think that one thing that definitely separates Bitcoin from fiat currency or government money by government decree is that they're inflating away your savings every single year. You're losing at least 2% of your savings every year. If you have the misfortune of living in somewhere like Argentina or Brazil, or in Venezuela, or you look at the ruble as well, which is huge volatility there. But there's places where they hyperinflate away your money. You lose everything that you own. It's absolutely devastating, and it breaks my heart. So the idea that you can have alternative forms of money, that you have choice, I think that is so exciting. I think the idea that you can have a money that you can hold and you're not going to lose value is really, really exciting. Bitcoin was designed to be a deflationary currency. And I think that that's much better than the current system we have.
And it's important what you said there. It's important to have alternative forms of currency. You're not saying to put all your money into Bitcoin because, as we know, it could fall further and you just don't want to lose that cash. But and
it's not about telling people that they should get into Bitcoin either. It's about saying that if they want to, they can. That's something we've never experienced before. Before, you had the government saying, no, we're going to outlaw any other form of tender. USD is the only legal tender that we allow. They even banned gold, for a while there. And that's terrifying. Telling people that, no, you do not have the ability to trade the things that you want to trade or use as a medium of exchange the things that you want to use. And to finally have something that can't be shut down. We had lots of forms of digital money before Bitcoin. You had e-gold and they're hash cash and e-cash and all of these different things. But they, either didn't take off or the government shut them down. And they shut them down because there's the focal point. There's the central switch that they could turn off. They could throw people in jail. They can threaten centralized companies. What happens when you have a currency that is decentralized, that is completely distributed, where if you want to shut it down, you have to shut down thousands of computers all over the world? I think that that's a pretty powerful tool. So just saying that people have that option doesn't mean people have to use it, but just that optionality is so powerful.
And what about ICOs then? Because again, that gets bad press. People are just using the open source code, just changing it slightly to create an ICO to raise money to fund investments, and it disappears after a few months. People are losing their shirt on it. Again, that's different to what we have in terms of cryptocurrency.
Well, I think that ICOs were an interesting phenomenon. They came about, and they're so similar to an IPO. And really, IPOs, there's this huge barrier to entry. They're inaccessible for the large majority of people. If I wanted to buy shares in a company or I want to invest in something, in America, you have to be an accredited investor. You need millions of dollars of net worth. It's just out of reach of the ordinary person. And what does that mean? It means that some people get access to this financial infrastructure and some people don't. Mm-hmm. When you had an ICO come around, it was because the original system was so gummed up and inaccessible that it was really hard for people to get involved with. If you were a company that's trying to raise funds, it's just so hard. And so for me, in my opinion, ICOs became a means of regulatory arbitrage, with people say, okay, well, let's figure out a way around this. That being said, maybe there's something to these laws that are protecting people. Like if there's, my heart breaks at the idea of grandmothers getting swindled, and so there is a reason for these laws, whether I agree with them or not. I can definitely see why you need to protect people, why you would want to create a system where it's harder for people to get swindled. But you're also creating a system where it's hard for people to invest if they want to. And so I also do think that choice is an important factor. And ICOs, so many scams out there, let's be honest. But there are also lots of great projects that I personally invested in, that I believe in still, that use the ICO mechanism. And I don't think it makes them bad people or should tarnish them because they're using ICO structure. I think it's really just a reflection of how difficult and cumbersome the traditional financial structure was for them to be raising money in.
ICOs can't be traded on exchanges like Kraken. How do you go about, if you were interested in helping out or investing in a company or whatever project they're undertaking and they have an ICO, are they doing it on their own platform? Is there a platform in which they can allow potential investors?
ICO, an initial coin offering, the coins are available on exchanges.
Okay.
Depending on the project and depending on whether the exchange wants to list them.
Yeah.
There are also decentralized exchanges as well. So if a platform won't list something, then you can find someone, and do like direct peer-to-peer exchanges there. So there are definitely ways that you could be trading and these are mechanisms that allow liquidity in these markets where otherwise there would be none. If you have a central figure that is an exchange deciding whether or not they're going to list something, then that is going to affect the liquidity of a certain coin or token. So I think decentralized exchanges are really important, and I think we're going to see more of them as well. I think there'll always be a place for centralized exchanges, but especially when you look at places in Asia, for example, where they're banning, like in Japan, I know that they banned a lot of privacy coins from being listed on exchanges. So if you actually wanted to trade Zcash or Horizon or Monero or any of these wonderful coins, I think that it's important to have that optionality, and decentralizations are going to be providing that.
What was your most recent purchase using Anita coins? Or are you a frequent spender or user of them?
My usual purchases in cryptocurrency, obviously I do have a mindset of like a saver's culture, unlike my USD, which I know that if I don't spend it, it's going to lose value the next year. I'm very bullish on different cryptocurrencies. So I do try to spend the money that I like least. So I spend my US dollar a lot more than my crypto. That being said, sometimes crypto is just a lot easier. So when I'm traveling, for example, if I'm away for conferences, I very rarely get out currency in that country. I will quite often find people who live there, and I will ask them if they could pay so that neither of us have to exchange anything, and then I'll send them Bitcoin, or I'll send them whatever other token they want that I happen to have. So there's definitely great use cases. Like for dinner the other night, one of my friends paid me back in Zcash. So I'm using it on a peer-to-peer level, and I love doing that just because I love being part of this alternative financial infrastructure. I still see a role for USD. I still see a role for gold. I still see a role for like a lot of the different competing currencies, cryptocurrencies out there. And I think the need for those is definitely going to switch as crypto becomes more mature, as the infrastructure evolves as well. So super excited about what's going to be happening in the next few years, and maybe we'll hop back on another call.
Maybe in 4 years' time.
We'll
see how it goes.
Let's not wait that long, though. Let's not wait that long. It moves at light speed, so always stuff to catch up on.
Naomi, it's been great catching up with you. You know, it's fantastic to hear what you're up to, and the podcast is great. I've just listened to a few of the episodes, you know, over the last number of weeks, especially knowing that this call was happening, and I recognize a couple of names that you mentioned there from your own podcast, and I think it's important for people who want to get in part of that community. If they can't be there physically, well, definitely check out your podcast, and just type in Naomi Brockwell in Google search and you'll find your website too. Naomi, it's been always a pleasure. Really appreciate it, and hopefully we'll see a better price from this time next year. Maybe.
Absolutely. Let's bank on that. Thanks so much for having me, Frank.
All right. See you later then. Bye. Thanking you.
Okay.
See you again soon.
All right.
Bye.
Thanks, Frank.
Economic Rockstar is a free podcast that does not exclude anyone from listening as long as they have a device to listen, download or stream. I have many listeners from all parts of the world, and I truly am pleased to know that the Economic Rockstar podcast unites all of you through the common theme of economics. I strive to commit to releasing an episode each week and aim to develop Economic Rockstar into much more than just a podcast. Patreon is a platform that gives you, the listener of the Economic Rockstar podcast, the opportunity to express your appreciation of the show by committing a financial reward for as little as $1 a month. Patreon allows me, the creator of the Economic Rockstar podcast, to be rewarded and paid by you so I can continue with the running costs of the show and to reinvest and expand the podcast into other platforms or mediums in the future. To find out more on how you can help the Economic Rockstar podcast and have your name added to the supporters list on my website, please check out my Patreon page at patreon.com/Economic Rockstar or visit the supporters page on the Economic Rockstar website. If you enjoyed this podcast, why not leave some feedback or comments on the show notes page on economicrockstar.com, where you can also sign up and be a member of the Economic Rockstar community. If you're listening to this episode on iTunes or Stitcher Radio, I would love to have some feedback and for you to leave an honest rating and review, as this will help with the rankings of the show so that more people can find it. If you're listening on the website economicrockstar.com, make sure you check out the back catalogue of all previous episodes and interviews with some amazing professors and authors at economicrockstar.com/podcasts. Thanks for listening, and I really appreciate your loyal support. I know how much you love audio, so why not get a free audiobook with Economic Rockstar today? I've teamed up with audiobooks.com to bring you this amazing offer. Visit audiobooks.com/rockstar to download your free audiobook now.